Good afternoon and welcome to International Experiences and Opportunities for Electric Mobility for Decarbonizing Cities. Transforming transport is fundamental. Current global transport emissions account for slightly over 8 gigatons of CO2 emissions. And based on business as usual scenarios, these emissions are expected to grow significantly. But we urgently need to act and reduce emissions by 75% below current levels in order to reach around 2 gigatons of CO2 by mid-century, which would keep us in line with the Paris Agreement and the climate goal to keep global warming to well below 2 degrees. If we look at Vietnam's climate targets in transport, transport is responsible for 18% of total emissions. And the overall target is to reduce emissions by 9% unconditionally against a business as usual scenario and 27% with additional support. In its NDC, its nationally determined contribution that Vietnam just submitted to the UN Framework Convention on Climate Change, transport is subsumed under the energy sector. But 5 of the energy-related mitigation measures target transport. This includes freight, but also restructuring the transport market, shifting from private to public means of transport, shifting from conventional fuels to biofuels, natural gas, and electricity, as well as improving energy efficiency. And together with the Ministry of Transport, we as GIZ, together with the World Bank, have undertaken a study looking at the different mitigation potentials and its cost implications. And this study found that the improvements in vehicle fuel economy actually have the greatest impact, reducing about 5 megatons of CO2 in 2030. But mainstreaming electric vehicle market has the second highest potential of 3.5 megatons. Looking beyond greenhouse gas emissions, transport is also related to local air pollution. And if we look at Vietnam's air quality, the WHO, the World Health Organization, finds that every year around 60,000 people die prematurely linked to air pollution. And if you look at the chart, you can see that the average levels of particulate matter in Hanoi by far exceed those levels recommended by the WHO. However, Vietnam is not alone with this problem. Around 90% of world populations actually do live in areas that exceed World Health Organization recommended levels of air pollution. And this is a big problem. Now, if you look at e-mobility, e-mobility is one piece in the decarbonization puzzle. In order to transform transportation, we need to look at the mobility transition on the one hand and the energy transition in transport on the other. So with the mobility transition, we're talking about avoid, shift, and improve, avoiding the need to travel to the maximum extent possible, shifting the remaining trips to the most sustainable modes like public transport or non-motorized transport, and then improving the vehicle efficiency of those trips that we need to undertake. At the same time, we need to also transform the energy sector and make sure that those trips that we are still taking are fueled by renewable energy as much as possible. Electric mobility does address also other sustainable benefits beyond climate protection. We've already heard about noise, especially in cities. Buses can have a great effect here to reduce the noise levels. No local air pollutants are emitted from the tailpipe for electric vehicles, apart from the abrasion from tires. But there's also structural benefits, reducing the dependency on oil imports, promoting innovative and sustainable industry, and opportunities for local manufacturing, as we're also seeing in Vietnam with VinBus preparing for pilot operations. Cities are key for EV adoption. And this can be done in all the different subsectors that you can see here, from rail to public transport, but also looking at governmental fleets. Private vehicles can be promoted to switch to electric. And importantly, especially in Vietnam and Asia, 2- and 3-wheelers as well. However, there are still several challenges for the EV deployment that we need to address. And one is the high upfront costs for vehicles and infrastructure, despite a cheaper total cost of ownership over the lifetime, for instance, of a bus. There's currently still a lack of standardization securing, for instance, interoperability. The different operations of electric vehicles versus conventional vehicles also require new ways to procure, looking at the vehicle requirements, equipment, operations, and maintenance issues. And then there's also new market players like energy providers that we need to incorporate in our development of the electric mobility landscape. And not only looking at energy providers for electricity as such, but also entering into this political dialogue to green the electricity grid. And lastly, we need to consider battery recycling. So a comprehensive strategy is needed to enable e-mobility rollout on a larger scale. We cannot expect the market itself to cater to the needs of electric mobility and develop in and out of itself. One example for an electric mobility strategy is from Chile, a Southern American country. Here, the Ministries of Energy, Transport and Environment together published their electric mobility strategy in 2017, and it includes 5 strategic pillars with detailed actions for each of these pillars. Starting with regulation and standards development, then putting a focus on public transports, including taxis, promoting research and capacity development, looking at initial impulses such as pilots, fleet renewal of governmental fleets, or incentives in cities, for instance, for vehicle charging and free parking for electric vehicles. But the strategy also includes concrete targets for electric mobility, growing the fleet by 10 until 2022, so at the time of writing in a 5-year time frame, and then reaching 100% of urban public transport by 2040. And this is a target that was started to be 2050 and then was now updated in the nationally determined contribution of Chile in 2020 to already be reached in 2040. So these are really ambitious targets that set the framework for the development of electric mobility in the country. And Chile has been quite successful in its capital to install the biggest fleet of electric buses in Latin America. And what they found was that energy consumption was reduced by 76% compared to diesel buses, and then maintenance need by 40% compared to diesel buses. So the lower operating costs outweigh the high initial investment costs over the lifetime of the buses. But at the same time, they also experimented with a new business model where the energy provider finances the electric buses, provides charging infrastructure and electricity through a leasing scheme with the operator. The bus manufacturers provide the buses, but also in some cases, a maintenance guarantee, taking the burden from the operators who might not yet be familiar with maintaining electric vehicles. And the government provides long-term guarantees and ticket subsidies as well, which they have also already provided for the diesel buses. So the public-private partnerships helps to overcome the upfront costs as well and sharing of financial risks. Another example for electric fleet development is from the city of Berlin. And what you can see here is a little bit the challenges that the city struggled with when they started their first trials in 2015. And now they are operating around 137 buses since 2019. But market availability of vehicles was an issue to begin with. They have now achieved that, overcome the problem, but the first tender, for instance, only received 1 offer and had to be prolonged so that enough offers were received. There was also a lack of established standards, especially for quick charging systems and a software backend. So in the end, they first trialed with induction charging, but then switched to pantograph opportunity charging technology. And this, if you go towards the end of the challenges, also overcame the problem of range limitation of depot loaders and the resulting additional vehicle requirements that, together with new vehicle schedules that consider the charging times and the opportunity chargers, have been overcome, and the system is now operating. So it does take some time to move towards electricity, and these are still relatively early days, but it is possible, and it requires a little bit of innovation and experimentation as well. So key recommendations include: start now. Even though we want to have as clean as possible electricity grid in the end, we need to develop the electric mobility market in parallel. Create the political will, awareness, and broad stakeholder participation to set a basis for successful implementation, and then develop a vision, strategy, and action plan for implementation of e-mobility. Also establish the necessary legal and fiscal framework and possibly fiscal incentives to promote electric vehicles. Capacity building is needed amongst planners, mechanics, electricians. And then we need cooperations between energy and mobility sector, between public and private actors, to develop new business models and show the feasibility with demonstration projects. And this can be done and supported both at national and city level. And we are here to support you with the NDC Transport Initiative for Asia, a new project financed by the International Climate Initiative with a partnership of 7 international partner organizations working towards supporting countries in Asia to work on comprehensive strategies to decarbonize the sector. The project entails 3 country components, independent components in China, India, Vietnam, and a regional component for regional dialogue and learning. And in Vietnam, we support the Ministry of Transport in developing the decarbonization strategy and climate strategy in the transport sector to help implement the national determined contribution of Vietnam, looking at different aspects, including piloting electric mobility, and in particular, advancing the e-mobility development with policy and roadmap development to set the right enabling framework and have a strategy in place to push electric mobility. So let's face that challenge together. Thank you very much for your attention.